Hey guys, this is Rez, and this time we're even closer. I just waited in line at 8 in the morning to get a graphics card. Yeah, so I finally changed my 12-year-old graphics card. But enough about me. Let's get started and the correction of the GUI. So in the last exercise was you need to pick up where you left off, where you have an exceptions, you have airplane status, the airplane itself, and not touch any of these three, right? We don't even need the IO anymore, but not touch any of these three and make a GUI that would work with our airplane. And this is what our previous assignment was for, was to erase any collusion, the correct word is coupling. So airplane doesn't rely on anything else. So right now, what we're going to do is create a GUI that would utilize airplane, and airplane will function still correctly without changing a single character. And this is the goal of this one. So again, we're going to create our GUI. So in this case, we don't need all of these choices. We are going to keep them because maybe we'll do a bit of copy. No, actually, you know what? I have the previous version. I copied it here just so we hold on to it for later. So for what we're going to do is just erase everything that's in there. Make sure we don't make any mistakes. There we go. So now we have an airplane. What we need to do is create a GUI that will manage that airplane for us. So in this case, both my cats are coming here. I have 3 cats actually. A lot of cats. So this is anyway, just to leave her be, and the other one's over there looking at me staring, wondering what I'm doing. Anyway, coming back to this, so what we want to do is create a new Java class, and we're going to call it something, whatever you want. In this case, I call it GUI because it's managing the GUI of the airplane. A better name would be airplane GUI. But in this case, because they're all in the same package, GUI is a perfect name. Now, there's 2 ways that we could manage our GUI. One is that we extend the class with a JFrame, or you create the JFrame in there. Now I've seen your work and you've done it either or. That is fine, either or. Just don't do both. Some of you put both. Some of you put the main class and this extends JFrame. It makes no sense. Remember, the object should only do what it's supposed to do. So think of a GUI, and what should it do? Should the main class extend GUI? Doesn't really make sense, right? Again, remember that eventually, as you could probably see here, we're going to get big projects of thousands of files. If your file name or your class name or the name itself doesn't reflect what it is, it's going to confuse a lot of people. And I've seen people get fired for that. Anyway, and I've seen people lead with crappy code too. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Let's get back to here. So we want to create a GUI. Sorry. So in our case, we're going to extend GUI, and we're going to move forward that way. But if you didn't want to extend it, the code is exactly the same. Just make an object of JFrame, and rather than directly calling it, you'll be that object dot whatever. Cool? So in this case, let's go ahead and start this out. So we got to figure out, sorry, my cat is directly in front of my screen. Hello. There we go. All right. So this directly creates our object. So the first thing I would like to do is create a constructor, which is going to create the components. The constructor is ideal because it's only going to run once when the object gets created. So it's going to make sure that all the components are there for the moment we need to use them. So calling a method or getting a click event, etc. So in this case, we're going to create a GUI. We could bring in some values here. Eventually, I'll show you decoupling even further. But for now, this is fine. So what do we need in our GUI, right? We got to think about this. The first thing we're going to need inside our GUI is the airplane to be managed. So we could first create a class call it airplane. We could also, if we really wanted to decouple a bit more, no, actually, we'll do it later. So right now, we want one airplane, and we could initialize it either here or here. It doesn't matter which part because they're both kind of around the same level of execution. So if we want, we could just put it inside of our thing, new airplane. Now, this object shouldn't be destroyed and recreated. So one thing we could do is make it final. So final doesn't mean the object can't change. So the values inside could always change. It just means we cannot erase the variable. The object reference that we have, we can't change this variable to another object, such as, let's say, this, and I make another. See, like, you're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to destroy or change it. We're not allowed to do this either. Okay? We're not destroying the object itself. We're trying to point to something else, and we're not allowed. That's what the final keyword is for. Now, other than that, the initial stuff that we needed to set up for our GUI, the first thing would be to set up a title for our window, right? So set title, and here we could say airplane interface. Other than that, we want to set up our layout. So which layout we utilize is going to help us a lot. I've seen a lot of you just go with absolute coordinates. It's okay, but absolute coordinates could become troublesome. One, it's time consuming. You have to figure out every location. Are they overlapping or not? Did I miss something? Another problem would be that if your screen resizes, that absolute coordinate will not be useful. So you gotta maybe restrict the user's screen size. Maybe restrict it to full screen or something like that. Again, it's not that great. You're gonna see in every different, eventually you might go in mobile for the students that are currently doing it. You might go in mobile or you might go in web or whatever. You want something that's dynamic, that it would change with the size of the screen or such. These layout managers' sole responsibility is that itself. So in this case, what we're going to do is to create a border layout. And I'm going to set that up. Hey, kitty. So she's just woken up. It's late at night for me. All right. So in this case, we want to set up as a border layout. And if you remember border layout, we have a north, south, west, east in the center. So what we could do is divide them into different methods or just one method. I kind of like it if we could make it into, all right, kitty, you gotta come out. She wants to play. All right, enough of that. So, so we got our north component, we got our south components, we got our west components, we got our east. I can't see. Sora, you gotta come out. Sorry about that. You guys could just fast forward. I can't spell. And we got our center, right? Center components. Now you gotta remember that these methods are methods to initialize. They shouldn't be called ever again. So one thing we want to do is make sure that all these methods that I'm going to create are private, right? So generate, which one was it? Oh, we're just gonna put it there. So notice that just the GUI itself, when it creates these templates, will make them private and ask you, what do you want it to return? And again, we're creating components, so we don't really need to return anything. And the only thing we need to do is make sure that all of these, come on. I'm just generating it. It's a bit easier. Well, I could have just wrote it. Sora, stop doing that. All right. So let me just go ahead and bring these a bit. Actually, center could be the first one. North and south. We could put that at the end. Okay. So we set up our layout. We set up some methods to create each location. After creating those components, what we want to do is put the default settings for our airplane, or even before that. We could create another method for the JFrame, settings. The last command, as you guys remember it, should be that we set it to visible. And why we do this last is because it's going to refresh the frame. So if any components are added after this, you won't see it unless you refresh the frame, either by changing the size or something like that. In this case, in the command, set visible will refresh it right away because it's first time generating the visibility, or the how everything looks, let's say. So other than set visible, this is going to be our last thing. We need to set some values or some settings for our JFrame. Some of those settings would be such as set location relative to null. So like this, it'll be centered screen, center screen. I've seen you guys went a bit beyond, or you followed some other tutorials and you did a look and feel, which kind of changes how it shows. But to be honest, I don't think it's an important aspect, and you could learn it on your own if you need to. So we're not going to do that. There is one thing that's interesting. It's called pack. This will resize. This will resize the window to fit everything. And this is important, especially since we're using these layout managers. So as we add components and so forth, so on, it could become big or whatever, and it will resize the window for us. I shouldn't have said whatever. That was the exact point. So if there's too many components, rather than making them too small to be able to see, it would rather make the window bigger. So this is an interesting thing to do. And again, it doesn't really matter. Just make the size bigger. So if you don't want to use pack, you could have used something like set size and specify the size of the screen. And lastly, we're just going to set, so you can see here, default look and feel. We don't want that. Default close operation. So what do we want to do? In this case, I want to exit the application the moment it closes. This is good enough to set up our JFrame, our window. And these components are going to be what we're going to put inside them. So the first thing we want to do is, maybe we don't need this. And all we want to do is create a GUI. Notice that I don't create a variable because we're not doing anything to the GUI yet. If I want to create a variable for it, it's okay. It doesn't going to change much. Sorry, I just got hiccups. So you could see here right now, I got a window. Oops, let's bring it back one more time. We got a window, but it's practically too small, right? This is again because we didn't say any size. All we did was pack. So it will just resize it to pack everything. So it'll get bigger or smaller depending how many components in there. In this case, there is no components, so it's super small. The only other thing you'll notice is the title that we set over here. Cool. So let's get going. So which side would we like to do first? The north side is the easiest one because all we have in there was to set up our titles and some, just the titles actually. So sorry about that. So in this case, determine how you want to name your stuff. You could normally, the name of the variables. So you could normally name them something like this, LBL, and specify what it is. Again, please don't do these. I see a lot of this. This doesn't make sense. You will lose points if you're being graded by me. You could also put it at the end, such as text, let's say LBL, which signifies a label. I prefer it to be at the beginning because then we could see all labels by typing LBL. So you could see all the different values available. Anyway, whatever standard you come in this, it's up to you and your team and your company. So here we're just going to say LBL title, and we're going to create a J label, and we're going to call it airplane controls. Yeah, that's the name we had before. So other than that, we got to remember that we're going to add this. So we're going to say LBL title, and we got to say where exactly we're adding this, because we're utilizing a border layout for our J-frame. So in this case, we're going to add it to north. It doesn't pop up. Border layout dot, there we go, north. Again, use the IntelliSense. Don't memorize things. It's not worth it. One other thing we're going to do, we could come back to it. So you could see here right now, it got bigger to fit just my title here, airplane controls. It's a bit too small for a title, so let's go ahead and add some fonts. And over here, we're going to create a new font. What are the parameters? We need a okay, so LBL title, we need to give it who we're talking about, or sorry, the font, sorry, the text that we're talking about. Get font, we're talking about the current font. I'm a bit confused. We want name, style, and yeah, there we go. So the first parameter, name, the font name, this can be a font face or blah, blah, blah. We don't know any font names, so we're just going to use the default that's already there. That's what I meant. LBL type, get font name. And then we said we want to use what style. So font dot, in this case, we can make it bold, italic, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to just make it plain. And what size that do we want as a font size? Let's do 24. And again, you could look these up and change and do other stuff. It just takes a bit of research and a bit of reading. Reading is really important. So that's done for now. We'll come back to it if we need to do anything else. The next one we want to do, center, we want to do pictures. So we'll come back to that at the end. Let's go south. South is an easy one too. All right. In the case of the south part, I wanted to have some information when the user did something, either telling him warning that's wrong, or something happened, some confirmation, the engine has been turned on, and so forth, so on. So here, I'm going to create a J panel in this case, and center it, new J panel. So the purpose of this J panel is to make sure that all the information is centered rather than at the extremities of left and right. So to make it all centered, we're going to use this J panel, and we're going to say panel center it, and we're going to set the alignment to component center. Now, if you want to see how it looks before and after, just go ahead and comment this out when you get the corrections. Again, we're not going to delve too much into it because we want to waste too much time, sorry. Border layout south. Normally I don't do videos for corrections, but whatever. And sorry. One last thing is we want to have the J label for LBL information. However, this one is a bit of, let's add some text in here for now. Information goes here. Okay. However, this one is a bit unfortunate. Sorry, not unfortunate. I'm completely dead. This one, this J label, actually, let's run it first, is a bit unfortunate, meaning you could see here the text size is a bit different, right? This J label needs to be changed throughout our class. So it means in a different method, this label information must be able to be accessed. If we create this information variable inside this method, well, then it will only live within the context of this method. So that would mean when this method is finished, it would die. It would be destroyed by the garbage collector. So what we need to do is make this into a field. We could right click on it, refactor, introduce field. and what name you want, press enter, and you could see it becomes purple. Purple, again, it represents any fields you have. So in this case, we have two fields, airplane and LBL information. We'll come back to that a bit later. Now, in the west side is the next side we want to do. So let me just bring up what I need to see. Give me 1 second. I have two monitors right now, just so I can remember. Where is my... We're talking about west, east. Yeah, we're talking about west side. So in the west side, we want to have a list of buttons that the user could... No, sorry, I don't want that on the west side. I want that on the east side. On the west side, which is on the left, I want to get them a J progress bar so that they could see their current altitude. So there's going to be a couple steps on that. I want to see a text and I want to see a J progress bar. And we could do the east first or second, doesn't really matter. And again, we're going to create a J panel. Oops, I can't type J panel. And altitude information, J panel, there we go. Now, in this panel, we want to set everything in a line. So we want to take it from vertical. Sorry, yeah, vertical. So everything is going to be positioned one after the next. So in this case, inside that panel, we're going to set the layout. So another manager to do this for us. And then in this case, we're going to use something called a box layout. Now for the box layout, we got to give the container. So this is one reason we can't directly do it here. We need to specify who's the container, and the container is itself. So we're going to say panel. And lastly, we're going to say which direction we want it to go. So box layout dot, in this case, let's go y-axis, and that should be fine. So this panel is done. We're going to add this panel towards my J-frame. So panel, and we're going to specify where, border layout, and we're going to the west. So this panel is done. Now we need to add our information in there. In this case, I'm going to add a text and also a J progress bar. So let's go ahead and add a J label. Actually, you know what? I have this done. I'm just going to copy paste so we don't waste too much time. So you could see here, I created a label, altitude. The only thing it's going to do is to show the text altitude. And you could see here, I set it to center. Let me run it. Just to show you one step at a time. So notice here, again, our control looks a bit ugly. We'll come as we add more stuff, it looks more interesting. You could see here, altitude on the left is there. And we got our north and we got our south. Notice the south is centered and our left side is also centered, but there's nothing else, so you don't really realize it. We're going to see that in a second. That's going to stay there as the word altitude. Then we're going to add another J label. In this case, it's going to be a field, and this is going to be the current value of our altitude. So I'm going to go just ahead here and create another one, LBL current altitude. Now, just to show this, I see a lot of people putting these in a line, and that's perfectly fine. You could also make it a bit cleaner for your own eyes by making it 2 lines. So like this, you just go read it up to bottom. Which one you prefer? I prefer really like this. It's much cleaner, so I know what labels I have. It takes me a second. Rather than left to right, it's a lot of read. Anyway, you do however you like. They're both good. And one last thing we're going to add is our progress bar, our J progress bar. And again, we're going to put that at the top here. Progress bar. There we go. Now the progress bar is interesting. The progress bar, you got to say which direction you want it to go. And you got to give it a minimum and a maximum. Now this minimum and maximum, 0 and 12 1000 is not great. 0 is okay because the ground is always 0. But this one, we could go ahead and say airplane dot get exploding altitude. That's our maximum value, right? So like this, if I ever change that altitude, my JProgress bar will change with it, which is great. And then we add all of these new things inside our panel. Not inside our JFrame, inside our panel. Our panel is inside our JFrame. So that when we run this, we get something like this. This is pretty nice. And again, notice that it gets bigger and smaller, and I'm going to change some values in there. You're going to see it's pretty nice as we go forward. So let's go towards our east components. East components are going to be our buttons. What can we do? What is there? And so forth, so on. Let me just go ahead and grab those. So again, we're going to start with a panel because again, our direction is going to be up to bottom, right? This layout manager is going to deal with that. We're going to create each button that we need. So we have starting motor, stopping motor, takeoff, increase and decrease. We're going to set action commands for each one of these. These action commands are going to be a way for when it gets clicked for us to understand which button got clicked. We're going to define these strings up there as a final constant. Action listener. Actually, we're going to do that in a little bit. We're going to set their alignments to center again. And we're going to add all of these buttons to our panel. Now, the last thing that's missing, well, actually, let's go ahead and create our variables. So at the top of our screen, because it's final constants, I'll kind of like them to be at the top. And we're going to add them right there. Right? Now, these are variables because if I make a silly mistake here, it won't matter because they're all utilizing the same variables. It will matter a little bit, but it won't affect my code throughout. If ever I change one of them, it's changed everywhere because they're utilizing a variable. Again, really important. Now, let's go back here. The last thing I want to do is I want to do something when the button gets clicked. So we want to set we want to set what to do when it gets clicked. Normally, you would do this with an action listener, right? So we have a couple choices, and you saw the videos. In our case, actually, I'm just going to copy this here. In our case, we're not going to utilize we're not going to make our class implement action listener. What we're going to do is to use a method referencing because there are some downsides of action listener. One was that the method became public, and because it became public, everyone had access to it. So outside our class, they could call that method that we needed, right? Let's try it just to show you. So implements action listener. Sorry, I'm a bit tired, but yeah. Implement method. So action perform is the method that's required. But notice that action perform is public, meaning from here, if we had made this into an object, or if anyone had access to it, actually, let's name it better than X. I just wanted to show you a quick thing. GUI dot, what was it called? Action perform. So GUI got action perform. Here, I called this method, which I should not have access to from outside the GUI. So this is why we don't want to implement it or utilize it this way. Mind you, it's not a wrong thing. It's just having these public is really bad. And we can't really make it private when we're overriding. Why? Because the method we're overriding is set to public and we're making it more private than it is. We can't do that. 1 second. Wow. So what we could do is rather than having us implement action listener, we could use a new technique, which is called method referencing. So method referencing, the only thing that's required from us is to have the correct method signature. And in this case, it just requires action event E. So we're going to remove the override because we're not overriding. We're going to create private void. And if we want to, we could rename this to something else. But because GUI people already know what it's called when it gets clicked, I'm going to keep it the same name. But we could have named it whatever we want. So now this here, rather than saying that, we're going to say this : action performed. And you can see now that it's correct. So we're just going to copy this. So for all our clicks, it's going to go to this method, and then we determine what to do in that method. Right? So again, let's run it. We're not going to click on it. There's nothing happening in that method, but we could see here a list of our buttons that we set up. Right? And again, we got our north. We got to make that centered. We got our south that's centered. We got our left, and we got our right. This looks not bad. So let's, oh, by the way, on the right side, we right aligned it, not centered aligned. So you could see here that they're pushing towards the right of the screen, which is nicer than it being centered when they're all different size buttons. Sorry about that. We could check my phone later. Actually, it might be important. It's pretty late. 10 seconds won't be long. Okay, so so we got most of our controls done. We need a picture in the middle, but we could get that in a bit later. We're gonna do the center a bit later because it's talking about pictures. We're not there yet. Let's go and set up our buttons. So now we want to think about when our buttons get clicked, what should we do? Actually, first of all, before that, I want to center our north component. There we go. So LBL title set alignment X, and over here we want to do center. Just run this one more time. Sorry, it was on the left side and it was bugging me. Now we should have something centered and it looks nice. Nope, I did wrong. Give me 1 second so I don't play too much with this. Oh, sorry, it's not the alignment X, it's the horizontal alignment. There we go. In the case of the label, it's a bit funky. I remember I had to play around with this and I had to read a bit of instructions online. We needed to do something else because the label is taking the full size here. So the full size of the north component, because of border layout, it gives it the full size. Because of that, even though the text, the content inside was small, it still had the full screen. So it was always centered. So what we had to do was to say the content in that label, which is just the airplane controls, that's all the space, I'm sorry, that I want it to be in the center of the label. Right? Let me, I don't have my pen turned on right now, but basically means, again, that the label is actually taking the full size, but the content, just the text, is taking the center. And that's why we needed to say the LBL title set horizontal alignment, not tell it where we are, and which we normally did, right? Not this one that we normally do. Anyway, doesn't matter. Let's go back to our button click. So in this case, we want to do some actions for each click. Each click is going to come to us as an action event. We're going to know which one it is because of the get action command. And we could compare it to the finals that we created at here, right? So let's get going. Now this is pretty easy. What we need to do is create a switch and put in all of those cases as we did inside our, let me just go ahead and grab it. Second. So we needed to add all our actions the same way we did inside our main previously. for each case, so which one gets clicked, in this case, get the action command. So depending which one gets clicked, call in the correct method. If that method ran correctly, we should be able to go to the next line. If we ran correctly, we should be able to go to the next line. Now notice, because these, I'm utilizing, this is probably named something else. Start engine. Stop engine. Sorry, in my other version, I named them differently. Takeoff is good. Append doesn't exist. We'll deal with those. Is landed doesn't exist. Might be something else I created. Now, or, well, let me see. Decrease, stop engine, take off, get status. Here we got a get status. Does it equal to, can I get airplane status dot? And we're checking if we're grounded. So engine on, grounded. There we go. All right, let's talk about what's going on here. So these methods, if we do Control Q on them, right, we get this little information box. Notice that they throw these exceptions. We need to handle these exceptions for all of them. But again, they're all practically telling me what the message is and so forth, so on. So if we go back in here, notice that when it throws it, I also added an exception message. So what we could do is that when any of these throw, we're going to capture all of them. They're only going to happen one case at a time. Not all of them are going to run after each other, right? There's the breaks. So what we could do is surround everything with a try block, so that whenever any of these throw an error message, we could capture it and give out the same message for all of them. So in this case, I'm going to say, right, actually, where are we? That's our switch. This is our try. We're going to catch all of them and give out something called an airplane exception. Right? If you guys don't remember why I could do this for all of those exceptions, that's because they're all, let me control click on it. They're all extending airplane exception and not directly exception. So if we go look down here, we could see all of these methods are extending our airplane exception rather than exception directly. So because of that, we could utilize polymorphism and say that any of those is going to be a airplane exception. So airplane exploded exception is a airplane exception. We, again, for those that skip those other videos, we don't want to put exception here because we will catch other types of errors when we shouldn't. Don't allow for mistakes to happen in the future. Cool. So that would catch all of those types of errors. Now you could see here, I did something a bit funky as well. We said that if an error happens, this catch is going to be initiated. So when that error happens, I'm going to change the foreground, the color of the text of my LBL information, and make it red. So like this, the user will know this is important, dangerous, or something like that. And then I'm going to set the text to that message given to me. I don't need to change the message, but if I want to, I could. That's the power of dividing, right? Again, we're not changing anything in the airplane, but because now we're GUI, we could determine how that information is being shown. Sorry, I got some cat hair in my nose. Okay. What is this append issue? Not me. Ooh, okay, maybe so append was probably not the correct thing to utilize. What we should have used was a J text area. So then we could add more information to it. In this case, you could see here, I'm adding new lines and so forth, so on. I can't do it with a label. Label is a singular line. So J text area gives me a bit more, well, not power, but it gives me a bit more control on multiple lines. So again, let's run this just to see if it works. So this was not good anymore, J text area. So now again, our window is missing our pictures, but you could see here information goes here. We could make it something else if we want. Could stop the motor, we get an error, engine already off, take off, etc. And the moment we start it, it's back to red. This is because we forgot to set the color back to normal when a button gets clicked. So we had it to color red, and now when we start, we want it to go back to the default color, which I'm believing is black. Let me see what I wrote. Yeah. So every time it gets clicked, we first initialize the color back to black. We try something so that if it's correct, it will be that foreground color black. If it's not, it will change to red and give us that error. Okay. One last thing we need to do, either case, either if it's good or bad, we need to modify our J progress bar altitudes. So everything that's on the west side. Let me just run it quickly. So when I start and I take off, right, and I increase or decrease, I need to change these values over here, which nothing's happening. So good or bad, it doesn't have to be in the switch. Good or bad, we want to do it. So in this case, we want to utilize finally, right? Whatever happens, good or bad, I want the finally to happen. Even if someone presses return or breaks something, I want to do whatever's in the finally. And in the case of the finally, what we want to do is update our west side. So we want to check if our altitude, exploding altitude, and here we're going to change the picture. We'll come back to this in a bit. So if altitude, actually this is my old code. We don't need to do that. Rather than saying get altitude, exploding altitude, we could directly just say airplane get status. Does it equal? And here we could say airplane status exploded. If it's exploded, set the foreground of the LBL current altitude to red. Same thing with the other ones. Here it's a bit different because warning we have at 10,000 and we have it at 11,000. At 12,000 we are exploded. Maybe we could keep it the way I had it before, so it just tracks the value of the exploding altitude. We could have also done, just to show you variations, airplane.getAltitude, a good old switch where the first case is airplane.exploding, right? And we could have put the values here, and we could have had one for 10,000 and one for 11,000. But the problem is the 11,000, actually, let's try this out. So we have our 12,000, and in the case of our, come on, airplane dot, oh, I mistyped air. Okay, there we go. Warning, which is 10,000, and then we do another case. Come on, there we go. Plus 1,000. Can I do that? Is that allowed? Constant expression required. Can I do this? No. This is not allowed because a constant expression is required. So this is why we don't go with switches. We could create a constant right before it, such as final int airplane dot. Oh, sorry. Upper limits. This is really bad stuff. I'm going to explain to you why, but I just want to show you that we could always do other stuff. I hate what's going on right now. So here that we need a final, we could do the upper limits. And because of these two, we could do whatever code in there. It is constant, final int. Whatever. The problem with this is if airplane changes, well, this value is not changing with it, right? What if our airplane is not going plus 1,000, it's going plus 100? Well, you're going to put another one there. It's fine. So this is not the best way of doing it. While if you look over here, we got the value that it explodes first, 12,000. It could have been 20, 30, 40. And then we check every upper value of the warning, because we know between exploding, all of that is going to be warning until it reaches the minimum warning. And then under the warning, it's all the good values that's possible. So in this case, again, we're checking the highest limit, the exploding, and then we're going downwards to any value between exploding and warning. And then afterwards, it's back to normal, right? So this is the better way. This is ugly stuff. And I guess I can't do this as a constant. Switches are interesting. Anyway, cool. So let's try running our application. So again, we don't have any images, so our screen is a bit smaller, but we started. Our airplane is good. Take off, increase. You could see the values are changing. We decrease. We can't stop. We get error message, but our altitude is fine. If we get to 10,000, we get a little warning. We got some text warning somehow. I gotta go and play with that. And if we reach 12,000, we got an explosion, right? And we should be writing that here. So why am I getting some text here? This is fine. This is fine. Set text, set text. I might have done something somewhere, or I haven't finished some code and I used some older code. Do we got any consoles? Yes, I forgot to change all the console stuff. So here, we got our status. Why do I do this? I don't understand. Okay, I might have just not finished this thing, or if I gave you this earlier version, just note that the system.outprintln should not be in there, right? The separation with errors, I probably just went too fast. So here, we want to again throw new airplane exploded and give some message. Actually, what message did I have? There we go. So throw new airplane exploded, and we could go ahead and copy this and remove those things. Same thing for warnings, but again, we don't need to have any of this here. We do need to set it to that, but we don't need this to be here, to be honest, because now we're doing it outside. So the altitude changes, it's done. The only thing we need to do is to set the airplane exploded. This we don't need. It should be okay. Did I do something wrong? There we go. Hopefully it's okay. Let's just run it quickly. My eyes are tired. So we start, take off, increase. Again, we got to test your code. Airplane exploded. We got our boom. Decrease. Nothing is working. Good. This works out fine. Now that our airplane works, right? And again, I modified airplane because the previous assignment I didn't correct it correctly. Anyway, it's fine. So now that our airplane correctly works, we're going to do an extra bit. And that bit is to add an image into our application. The first thing we need to do is to add an image file to our project. So let me go ahead and grab those. So I'm going to create a new package and we're going to say display. Inside that display, we're going to grab a couple things. One is the GUI. I'm going to move it to there because the GUI is also the display. And another thing is the two pictures for explosions. So I'm going to copy that and bring it here. So we got our airplane image and we got an explosion image. Notice that both my files are PNG. PNG is one of the formats that allows invisible backgrounds. So there's no white background. If you grab a JPEG, there's always a default background. So we don't want to have that square. This is good because now I could paint the background to any color I want if I wanted to do that. Okay, it's just an extra bit. So going back to the GUI. So inside the GUI, I created a method. Let me go ahead. What was the method called? I commented it out. Here we go, change picture. So I created a method called change picture. Change picture, we're going to uncomment it. What change picture does is that when any moment that I want the application to change my image that's there, it's going to call this method, and this is the code to do it. Okay, don't stress on how it works or etc. I don't want. Let's go over a quick little format because there's many ways of doing the image changing. This is one way, and it's not that important. In this case, we're using something called a buffered image. And over here, we're going to read. Now, this is the important part. We're going to read from this resource that we have here. Right? So this resource is going to be the file name that we have. The file names, I'm going to write them up at the top. It's going to read from this into this buffered image. I had to add this line because the image wouldn't be changed if I don't remove it first. So if there was already an image, it wouldn't work. Again, not so important. Lastly, we have a label, and that's where I'm putting my image inside. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix this code. You're going to see there's a few other lines we need to do, such as the centered components, these that we're going to add. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the center, and we're going to add those. So here we got change picture. We need to specify the airplane and add pick label, which is the label we created. So give us 1 second. So let's go at the top. We're going to add another label, J label, and we called it pick label. There we go. And also we needed to specify where our two images are. So notice that a lot of you added a absolute path to the explosion PNG or an absolute path to the airplane PNG. I'm going to create a video where we're going to talk about what's absolute and relative, but absolute paths are not great or ideal because when you run it on a different system, that path doesn't exist, most likely. So when you create a relative path, it just says where I am currently in this room or in that location, that folder, go and find that picture and it should be fine. Right? I'm copy pasting from the previous stuff I wrote. So let's just go quickly. You could see here I made some mistakes. Blah, blah, blah. Give me 1 second. There are some stuff I am missing. Just gotta look what I did not copy. Set south. Change pictures. GUI line 178. That's the one. Looks okay to me. All right. So what am I missing? Exception and thread about legal argument. Input null. What is it null? So he couldn't find the image. He couldn't find image. That's fine. Where's my GUI? GUI is in the same location. So this get class is, we're getting this GUI class. This is why they're in the same location. And then we're setting get resource. So in this class, it should have found explosion.png. Sorry, there we go. So what did I do wrong? All right, I'm going to pause the video, figure this out. I'll get back to you and I'll let you know what. That was probably the wrong button. That was the wrong button. All right, guys, I figured it out. So I was looking around and I couldn't understand why this was wrong, because the get class get resource is basically getting the current directory. And that's, if we look, it's a bit unzoomed. Let me go back to presentation. All right. So if we go looking here, sorry, let's go back here. So this get class should have got me the class GUI, and that's where those two locations are. So what it was doing is the current directory from here should have found airplane and explosion PNG. But when we looked at the build, so this is the compiled version, if you notice inside the display, I'm missing airplane PNG and explosion. So for some reason, the compiler didn't see these pictures, because I don't know why. Okay, so maybe because they're not classes, it didn't rebuild it, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to, well, normally I would clean it, but we're going to rebuild it and see if it's there. If it's not, we're going to force delete the class. Let me press refresh. No, I'm going to force delete this thing, and yeah, this we don't really care. And what we're going to do is build it again, run it. There's a lot to build, so let's just go ahead and build this. So it's going to take a little bit more longer because it has to build, and you can see here the out's coming. And if we look here, we still don't, we have it this time. Okay, so let's see what's the problem now. It's still the same problem, but this time I actually got my airplane PNGs. Sorry, I was playing around with it, trying to figure out what was going wrong. Now it should work fine because we have the airplane PNG and the explosion. So this out is great to check out. As you can see here, I saw that the build wasn't doing correctly. And now that the build is there, we get our image perfectly there. So the file name being airplane PNG and explosion PNG. So we start, take off, increase. And when we hit boom, it's done. We don't change the image anymore, and everything else will give an error. And now we allow the user to decide when to exit or to do anything. So now what happened is, one second. So just to recap, what happened now is that we have an airplane class done. We shouldn't need to change it. And that airplane class could be utilized either in the console or in GUI or virtual reality, whatever the case being. This is more powerful when they're decoupled from any specific thing, such as from console, such as from GUI, etc. It's not our job to determine the users, let's say the programmer that's utilizing our class. The same way, the guy who created JFrame, as an example, doesn't really know where you're going to utilize it, but knows that when you utilize it, you're going to need to create, let's say, a screen, components, and so forth, so on. It doesn't know how you're going to utilize it, and that's the powerful thing. It doesn't rely on anything else than what JFrame is. It doesn't showcase anything on the console. It doesn't do anything other than what it's supposed to do. And that's that for GUI. I'll see you guys in the next time.